Tappy has just released Arc 7 Chapter 64, and this video will be a summary of the chapter. I highly recommend you check out my Arc 7 Chapter 63 summary. Anyways, let's begin. The ability of Obart. This ability affects the old itself and causes them to become children. Each living being is merely a container for their old. In other words, if you change the old, the physical manifestation of a person can also be changed. By compression of the old, then the container, which is the body, should also shrink in response. By the way, this is very important. I'm going to talk a bit more about this at the end of the video. This is actually very, very important. We see two people speaking. I believe one of them is Obart, by the way, so quick editor's note. They talk about the ability and the idea that it's a secret technique, as well as the fact that if the body shrinks, then the mind should also shrink. The scene changes. We see Subaru boiling with rage. Every unpleasant emotion you can think of is coursing through Subaru's body. He hears the same talking from his comrades, and he mentally insults them in his head. When the scaled man panics, Subaru thinks that no one wants to listen to him whine. When Rusty says that he can use a sword better than the old man, Subaru thinks he's a fool and a liar. When the old man says he cannot trust Rusty with his life, Subaru thinks that he's an idiot who can't get through this alone. Subaru runs to the sword immediately, triggering the guiltylowe to move. He throws the sword to Whites, who is the old man, who grabs it. Wise realizes that Subaru's intention is to change the target of the guiltylowe. However, Rusty, seeing this, gets agitated and tries to grab the sword. Subaru tells the lizard guy to turn around. Subaru calls him Hyan. As he turns around, his tail hits Rusty in the head, knocking him away from Wise, the old man. The guiltylowe jumps at Wise, but Subaru tells him to duck. And Wise does this whilst throwing the sword, which lands on Hyan's chest. The guiltylowe then chases Hyan and he runs away. During this, Subaru ran to the side of the arena where there was a handle. It was a bit high for the child Subaru, but he jumped up and he grabbed it. This handle caused the Colosseum to moan with sound, raising a cage, and it essentially split the entire arena into two semicircles. However, the guiltylowe was on the wrong side, which resulted in Subaru's allies to be killed. The only survivor was Wise, and then Subaru was killed by the guiltylowe. The scene changes. We see the guiltylowe trapped trying to break through the fence, with Subaru and Rusty thinking of a way to win. We see that Rusty's name is called Idora. So again, a quick recap. Wise is the old man, Idora is the rusty-haired person, and the lizard guy is called Hyan. And thank you to Ice from Witchcult Translation for telling us the names. We see that Idora was not a warrior. He was a slave due to failing to repay his debts. He was currently struggling to pull the sword out of the ground. Subaru then helps Idora pull the sword out as the guiltylowe comes barreling at them. We see Wise and Hyan have already been killed. The guiltylowe then breaks through the fence and charges at them. However, Subaru and Idora pull out the sword and swing it at the guiltylowe's head. However, it blocks the attack and knocks them into the air, and they fly into the wall, killing them. The scene changes. Subaru's soul boils with rage. We see Wise talk about stealing food, and if you make people believe you are dangerous, you can actually avoid a confrontation. Hyan says that he knows his allies will use him as a decoy again. We see that Hyan was used as a decoy by his friends, and then he was captured. He was essentially betrayed by his friends, and now he was here on Gunnenhive. Next time, they will survive. Subaru has seen them die many times, but he will cheat and win. Cecilus calls out to him. Is there anything you want to tell your companion? Subaru refuses to give up as he is killed. The scene changes. We see Obart speaking to someone again. He talks about his technique. His ability to regress someone doesn't really work on someone who's determined to stay the same. Obart is asked about what happens if when someone who is regressed into a child is actually more headstrong and is actually more mindful when they are a kid. But Obart doesn't really address it and says that it's unlikely. The scene changes again. It was ironic as an outcome. Obart's technique, which transformed Subaru into a child, made him weak and fragile. The ability is used to make a threat a non-factor. As a matter of fact, Subaru's memories seem to be stripped away from him, and he looks like a 10-year-old. However, there was one difference. A 10-year-old Subaru was a child prodigy. It isn't important on whether or not he was truly a prodigy, but it was the fact that he had self-affirmation. As a child, Subaru believed he could do anything. He led the children around and believed he could reach the stars. Next. By the way, every time I say next, it implies that Subaru has died and is resetting. As he grew up, he was eroded by reality. The fact that he was the best at everything he did disappeared, leaving him with only helplessness and frustration. As Subaru grew in stature, he lost confidence. Next. The day when Subaru was summoned was when his self-worth was at his lowest. Though through his actions he managed to gain some self-worth, he still believes that sometimes there's more he can do. Next. What Subaru had gained whilst growing up disappeared. His physical strength is now gone, but mentally, I'm not so sure. Next. Natsuki Subaru was a child prodigy. He never knew defeat. He never knew about giving up. He never knew that his dreams would not come true. He was the kind of boy that believed he was the ruler of the world. The magic words that support Natsuki Subaru are, "I knew I was his child." The power of those words remove any doubt in the young Subaru's mind. So at this moment, Subaru said, "Next." He is the most powerful being in the world and will lay waste to Gunning and Hive. The scene changes. The crowd is speechless, not because Gustav ordered it, but because they were so shocked by the ghastly scene. We see Subaru order Wise and Idora to the left and right. He tells Hyan to pick the sword and throw it. The guiltylowe roars, one who has been trained to target dangerous enemies, so it's going for the person who's holding the sword. Cecil watching claps his hands and praises Subaru. The 4 men in the arena are fighting against the guiltylowe, and they are not dying. The 3 men follow the boy's instructions time and time again. Of course they can refuse to, but the fact that their lives are saved over and over again ensures that they follow the instructions. The only thing that keeps them on the defensive is their lack of strength. What are they trying to do is the feeling of the people watching the fight. The scene changes. Subaru's soul burns with anger. Death piles up after death, and he's grown tired of counting. Subaru again throws out instructions. All of them are in the ideal position. Wise is the only one who can face off against the guiltylowe without running away. So as the guiltylowe charges at him, Subaru pulls the lever. The guiltylowe, which was about to bite Wise, gets smacked in the jaw by the steel fence and becomes trapped. Wise is blown away from the impact, however. Hyan and Idora take Wise's place and they hold the giant greatsword. Both of them hold it and they swing down on the guiltylowe's neck, cutting it, but it refuses to die. Idora and Hyan are then blasted away by the paw of the guiltylowe, so Subaru tries to jump on the sword to sever its neck, but he's way too light. The paw that then attacked Hyan and Idora then swung at Subaru, but Wise recovered and impaled it with his sword. Idora and Hyen then jumped back into the fray and jumped on the sword with Subaru. By the way, they're jumping in the great sword, so there's 2 swords in this fight. The small sword, which Wise is holding, and the great sword that the 3 people are hanging on, which is cleaved into the guiltylowe's neck. However, the guiltylowe fought back, knocking all 4 of them away. Subaru realized he was 1 step away from winning, but stated that next time he will get to this step even faster and will win. However, Subaru was stunned as the guiltylowe's neck was then cleaved off in 1 strike. We see that the person that saved him was Tanza, who was no longer wearing her kimono and was wearing some undergarments. Gustav, seeing the dead guiltylowe, accepts Subaru and the rest as members of the Gladiator Island. Tanza approaches Subaru, but Subaru introduces himself and says that he needs to rest. Subaru then loses consciousness. We see that Gustav is watching him. Cecilis praises Subaru, and Gustav asks if Cecilis expected this, and Cecilis said he did. Gustav then asks what Cecilis did because he disappeared for a moment. And Gustav states that Cecilis most likely went to go wake up Tanza, and Cecilis said, well, if you knew, Gustav, why did you ask me? As Subaru and the others were carried out, Cecilis looks at Gustav and says, it feels like there's a grand story about to begin, don't you agree? And with that, the chapter ends. So there's quite a bit I want to say. I didn't include it in the chapter, but it seems like Cecilis was waging his life on Subaru and Tanza, and if they failed to win Sparka, I believe Cecilis' life would have been forfeit. So that's interesting. Not only that, at the start of the video I said I had something to talk about. It's namely this idea that the old itself is like your soul, right? And your physical body is the container of your soul. So if you change the soul, then your physical body will change in response to your soul being compressed. For example, Subaru's old was shrunk by Olbart's ability. As a result, Subaru was shrunken down into a kid. So this goes back to the question, why does Satella and Emilia look the exact same? So if the old, your soul, affects what you look like, and the fact that Emilia and Satella look the exact same, that would imply Emilia and Satella have the exact same soul. So that's just something to think about. I want to know your opinion, but let me know.